Hi, everyone. This is Dr. David Horton. I'm the Director of Learning Networks with the Core Collaborative. And thank you very much for participating and joining in this webinar. And those that are picking it up as a recording, thank you as well. The subject today will be effective teaming, and in particular, looking at the three components of effective teaming: the learning network, structures, and processes. So welcome aboard, and hope you find this enjoyable and some things you can take back and use with people in your organization or your teacher team. So a little bit about me. This webinar will be based in part with the content from my book, Leading School Teams, that you see on the screen. And it also brings into play some of the content from Leading Impact Teams from my colleagues, Paul Bloomberg and Barb Pitchford, that are also part of the Core Collaborative. And those of you that are working in that arena will recognize some of the content as we go back and forth. And hopefully these things will mesh together for you and be something that you can use and take back to add power and momentum to the teams at your school and in your district. So just a couple of things. Take a look at the slide. If you're not connected to us through our Core Collaborative network, there are a variety of ways that we would love to stay in touch with you and for you to stay in touch with us. So please take a moment and make note of those and find us and join us on our Facebook page, YouTube, Instagram, and our Twitter handle. So a little bit about our content today. We're going to focus on why the work of teams, teacher teams, is so important, and why what they do to build student-centered learning, why that matters such a great deal. We'll also look at the components of the team, learning network, structures, and processes, so that we can attend to the three components that have the greatest impact on how our teams function, so that we're getting the most from our teams. So a little bit of foundational understanding as we think about teams, and some of the things that we may take for granted as we look at teams. Let's look at what the end result of what we want teams to produce. So in other words, we don't do the work of focusing on teams because that's the work. The work that we want to improve, of course, are our students. We want our students to be better at what they do. We want our students to own the learning that they take on. We want students to be more responsive, to know where they are in their learning, where they go next, what they can do to improve their learning, and that they can be better citizens in their classrooms, at their schools, that they can be better learners in the long run, and so on, right? Those are the things we're after. So when we think about improving a team, we're not saying we want the team itself to improve for the sake of the team. We want the team to improve because their performance in helping students back in the classroom is our end goal. So take a look at this video if you wouldn't mind. You're going to see some students in action. The principal of this school is going to be facilitating the conversation, and students are going to be doing the talking and sharing out. As you watch these students, I want you to think of what the strengths that you see in these students. What do they do that impresses you? What do you think they're talking about that is interesting to you? What are the behaviors that they exhibit that are powerful? And what's interesting is that these students have just gone on an evidence walk at their school, and they're now back reporting to the principal what they've seen. And interestingly, around the outside of the table are teachers at the school that are fishbowling and listening to these students. So you can imagine, what would that be like if students at your school did that? Now, what might you expect to hear, and what would you learn from them? So think about the strengths of these students as you watch them, but I also want you to think about the inferences of what's going on at this school. What kinds of things are happening that would lead to this kind of conversation, and for students to be able to share out this kind of observation as they go from room to room. So here we go. Take a few notes as we go, and then I'll do a quick debrief on the back side of the video.
So one of the things, I don't know how many people saw Mr. Giordano's smart board, right? He had real specific questions to ask yourself as you were looking at somebody else's work, to help you give meaningful feedback.
He gave us example questions of what to use, like when we're asking a question about somebody else's piece, or when we were writing on the slips, what could they do better on that piece? Could they add more details? Could they add a conclusion? Could they try to strive for the 4? Like, it's trying to push yourself in those questions.
You know what's so interesting? Every time you speak, Matthew, you go back and forth between being a visitor in the classroom and between being a student in the classroom. Because all 3 classes that we visited happen to be classes that you're a part of also. So that's a really interesting perspective for me to see you go back and forth like that and look at the big picture and then put yourself into it and how it helped, those kind of things help you in the classroom. So that was a pretty cool perspective to have.
In Miss McDonald's class, they had standards, and they, as a class, they annotated the standards so they better understood what their goal was and what they had to do to get a 4 or whatever grade that they wanted to get on that.
And that's, right, the core of working in the classroom is if you understand what you have to do, you're going to do that work better, right? That has to come first before you can even begin your work. So that was a good noticing too, to see that the teachers are taking steps to ensure that you really have that good understanding.
I was in the sport class last year. She told me sometimes students understand it better when a student just tells them and explains it to them. So that always stuck with me. And now, like, it really helps because I saw them like talking about it and asking questions, and then another student would like build upon it, answer it, then they would be like, oh, okay, I get it now, and it really helps them. So that really like boosted them up.
And the last big topic that we looked at was assessment. And I know you had a lot of feedback because we saw assessment in every classroom, and you had a lot of feedback on that. So again, what can we say about the importance of feedback in making kids learn?
I liked how like they were helping each other because like they were adding ideas. Like if one person got a 3, you could add ideas and tell them what they could do to get a 4. And it's like it's easier because it's like more kid friendly, like vocabulary.
I like that he takes the time to explain how to get a 4, not only showing us the rubric, that he takes the time to show us what a rebuttal is and what a counterclaim is.
There are some that they would point out, and he gave us a standard, the 7th grade standard. It says I can make a rebuttal and counterclaim to weaken their opponent's argument. And I like how he like broke it down into like how you could start your rebuttal, how you could, and then he even did it with us. Like he did it for fair. He did the rebuttal of how you could do it for not fair and how to weaken it.
Okay, so that goes back to modeling too that we already talked about and being clear of what's expected of you.
Also, the learning standard is always evident. So when I walk into class, I usually copy down Mr. G's class. He's always got learning goal, and it tells us to copy it.
Yeah, he's like copy this
guy. She has it up on this big post-it thing, and then she writes the learning standard down, and then we copy it. So it helps us like what we're trying to achieve, what goal
you really understand.
And then like at the end of the day, you could talk about it, and then you could be like, okay, I really understand it now, and then they would go home and they would like remember it. Then the next day, if you work on something like connected and adding on to it, it could really like help them really understand the topic.
Ideas, so everybody's like involved and they can understand it and it's more fun. She does like student models. So we're doing rules to live by in class, and she did a student model, like a format to be like advanced. And so I helped out and we made it together as like a class, and we all wrote down our ideas.
I like that too because it kind of would inspire me to make like a different rule. Like I could add on to my rule because whatever is on the board. I thought it was really cool too.
So just reflect on yourself now. How important is it to get feedback through self-assessment and peer assessment?
Really important.
Can you tell me why that's important and how it makes?
Can I just give an example? Because when I hear peer assessment or self-assessment, I always think, well, at first, if you think yes for something, somebody else thinks no. When you talk to each other, you can influence each other and change perspectives. So it really, when you peer assess with someone, it's not only your thoughts, but it's somebody else's. And if they're the exact opposite than you, they can change your mind or you can change theirs. So it's
Okay.
And like Mr. G and Miss Brancaccio, they always remind us that like when you're peer assessing somebody, it's not about like the friendship or something. You're giving them honest opinions, and so that always helps us. Like when say I'm doing like my friends, then I'm not going to give them a grade. Like last week I had to do that because it was like not that good, but I had to be honest about it.
Okay. I was reading somebody's peer assessing, right? And they were good friends, and they were saying, I don't want to give them this grade but they're like, but I have to be brutally honest. And they looked at the rubric and they tried to give the grade that was like true.
like
They weren't
reasonable.
exactly. They weren't trying to like just be nice because you're my friend. You got a 4, okay? They weren't trying to do that.
Sometimes you have to be critical of yourself, right? With peer assessment to say, this is where I fit, and if I did more work, I could improve my grade.
Sometimes you gotta let
Right.
yourself down and then push yourself back up there.
And sometimes it's hard to self-assess because you don't want to fail yourself. You don't want to give yourself a 2. You want to always give yourself a 4. So sometimes when you peer assess, you don't actually give yourself the true grade.
Even when you peer assess yourself, like Mara says, you're not going to give yourself a true grade. You're going to always try to do better. You're always going to pick the highest to make the teacher, but then the teacher recognizes this kid didn't get that. If it's because of self-assessment, you have to be honest with yourself. Did I really get a 3? Did I get a 2? Did I get a 1? Did I get a 4? So when you're doing a piece, you have to be honest with yourself, because if you don't be honest with yourself, you're not going to get anywhere.
So back to the little T-chart that we had before we started the video of strengths on the left, inferences on the right. Take a moment and reflect and think now about the student strengths that you just observed in that video. And especially take into account that you're looking at some students that are middle grades students. And those of you that have the opportunity to work with students in the middle grades, like 5, 6, and 7, you know, they can be very interesting students. And their sometimes reluctance to want to engage with peers can be high because of the, the fear of looking like a fool in front of your peers and the social aspects of that. But you noticed in these students that they were very, very clear about the work that they were doing. They were very confident, weren't they? They had great vocabulary, and I'm sure many of you jotted that down. They had tremendous awareness, didn't they, about the standards that they were looking at in their classrooms, about what they were doing. They knew what they were doing, and they knew how to do it. And some of you, I'm sure, wrote those things down. Now move over and think about the system. What do you think is going on in the system? What's going on at that school? And as I'm sure is no surprise, some of you probably saw this right away, this is not a one-time occurrence at the school, is it? It isn't one classroom or one teacher who suddenly decided to do something new and innovative. You can see that there is a high consistency moving from classroom to classroom to classroom, so that as students go from room to room to room, they have the same set of expectations. They know what to see and look for in their classes. They know what they should be practicing and how to practice. They know how to get themselves aligned to what's going on in the classroom and so on. Imagine the power then of that as students move through their day, that as they go from class to class, they have a confidence that they know what to look for, and they also know how to advocate for themselves when they may have questions, when they may need clarification, when they may need time to practice, or even just to give some honest feedback to say, I don't understand this yet. I need a little more time, or I need a little more practice or explanation. Pretty powerful, isn't it? I would say that looking at those students, we would all love having groups of students like that in all of our classes or at all of our grade levels. So let's talk about how the teacher team benefits that their work translates into that kind of performance in our classrooms. Let's look at how that might happen. So obviously we talked some about why we would do this kind of work and focus on teams, but really it does come down to this, doesn't it? It's about empowering teachers and teacher teams to be the ones that look at the work they do, know the work they do, they know why they're doing it, and they're feeling success. They're seeing the data and the evidence that they're having success in their classes. And that's what that's all about. When we think about the visible learning work from John Hattie, we know that's exactly what we're looking for, isn't it? We're looking for actionable ways to put high leverage strategies that double, triple, or beyond the speed of learning of kids. Some of those high effect size influences you can see here. But think about the video clip that we just saw of those students in Staten Island as they were reporting out. We saw these in action, didn't we? We saw the power of kids recognizing, for instance, one of them, feedback. We heard the kids easily, very adeptly talk about feedback from a partner, feedback on my own work, feedback from a teacher, feedback in many directions helps my learning. They've recognized that there is power in honest, accurate feedback so that I can improve something. I can take my essay and write a stronger topic sentence. I can look at my equation, and with some feedback, I can graph my equation more effectively, more clearly. The other one you heard about was the kids talking about finding the standards in their classroom every day from their teacher. That would be under teacher clarity. The more clear the teachers are on knowing where they're going with those high value standards, the more clear the kids can become on what they're expected to do, what they're expected to learn, what they're expected to produce, and so forth. And then the last one you heard quite a bit of was that bottom one of assessment capable learning, and that more than triples the speed of learning at an effect size 1.33. When kids are able to look at their own learning and self-and-peer assess, they're more than tripling the speed of their learning. But notice you can't get to student self-and-peer assessing without having strong clarity, without having feedback as mechanisms. Kids have to be able to look at those things and use them in concert to get the most out of it. So how do teacher teams do work together to get there? Teams are basically built on three main components. One of them is the learning network. If you think of this triangle, there are three components to a team: the learning network, the structure, and the process. Let's look first at the learning network and why that's so important. So one of the major components of a learning network, when you think about how teams work together, how they learn together, think about the things that effective teams have. And one of those that you would land on very quickly is teams have relational trust. Teams that do not have relational trust basically are not a team. They may be doing work together, or they may be doing something together, but it might not be of high value. Relational trust is really that glue that holds a team together, because that way they can work together, build things together, give feedback to each other, and they become safe in the work they do, but also excited about the work they do and looking at the data that they generate. So take a look at this quote from Vivian Robinson, who's one of the great thinkers in education about how leadership impacts what teams do. Take a look at that quote. It's true, isn't it, when you look at that about teachers don't want to collaborate with people they don't trust, and they don't want to work for leaders in whom they don't have trust. Very true, isn't it? So when we think about how important relational trust is, it's so important, in fact, that it can disintegrate what teams can do right away, and it can completely let the air out of that balloon on where teams are going if they don't have trust. So one of the tools that I've left you, if you look at handout 3 of the learning packet, is a couple of things about how do you know you have a learning network and how do you build and sustain a learning network. One of the things I would encourage you to do if you're watching this as the recording would be to take a look at that resource page and pause the recording for a moment. And what I'd like you to look at then would be not only read through what the Learning Network has, but look at and think about your strengths. What do you do now? What do you have? Where can you begin your work building from that strength? And then from that, what would be your analysis? What would you start working on to improve other areas or to magnify what you're working on as a strength? So it's very important to look first at strengths, don't look for deficits, and think about what you do well and where you can begin to amplify what you're doing. So how do we do that kind of work? Well, one of the things to build relational trust that comes in is this idea of having dialogue and conversation. People have to be able to talk with one another and talk about the professional work they do to build that trust. So one of the things about my book and Leading School Teams that can be a resource for you is to have some structured conversations that people can talk about to start building some of that relational trust, that they get to know each other professionally and know what they're thinking about, and that they can start building some trust even in small parts as they move along. The Leading School Teams protocol is able to be done in about 10 to 12 minutes. In fact, it's usually done in a shorter time frame than that, so that you can still have the meeting that you normally have in your PLC time or your team time, but you can also insert one of these conversations so that we can talk about and build some relational trust around the professional work that we do and around the way we think and around the way we see learning taking place and so forth, so that I get to know who you are a little bit better. Consider this, most of the time in most schools, teachers don't have an opportunity to go in and see other teachers teach. They don't get to see what they actually do and what they do well and what they could borrow from their partner. So this is one of those ways that we can at least start to shrink that a little bit and get to know what other people do and what they believe in and what they find effective about their style with their students. So in the book, there's a quick diagnostic that you can use on pages 7 and 8. This is just a snippet of that. And you can see, as you look at this, the idea about finding where would you begin in the book to look for some dialogues you could use. Notice that the book is built in a nonlinear way. Depending on what you think your team needs, you could start in any of the chapters of the book. And in fact, there are also some reflective tools that are just for leaders, both administrators and teacher leaders, to think about how you lead the team, so that you can think about, how do I see the team? How do I see our progress? How do I think about what's next? How do I plan for what's next? So some of those reflective pieces are also built in as reflective dialogues and activities that you can have with another leader, or you could even do it as a self-reflective dialogue. Some of the more popular discussions that are in the book I've listed here, you could pause this on the recording as well and take a look. But in each chapter, there are a couple of high value ones that I get comments on often that people find help them toward conversations that are more powerful, that help them uncover things with their team or with their other fellow leaders. So if you're looking at a place, where do I start? These might be some of those that can help people uncover the power of a team, the power of working together, the power of moving toward common goals, what our chemistry is as a team, so forth, and also what we do to maintain high performance as a team. So a question for you, and if you're on the recording, I would encourage you again here to stop and pause the recording and ask this question of those that are with you, and that is, how might having guided conversations uncover thoughts and beliefs to bring a collective benefit for your team? And also, how can those discussions build relational trust and a stronger learning network? One of the questions that often comes up would be, in schools, there's typically a bell curve of team readiness and performance. On one extreme of the bell curve are teams that are really, really flying. They're doing great work. They've been doing it for a while. They have strong relational trust and cohesion, and they're really, really doing amazing things. Most of the time, in the big middle, there are teams that are maybe not as effective, but they still have an effective PLC experience. These are some teams that can start benefiting from having this relational trust building. And then there are also teams that are on the lower end of the bell curve that might really be struggling with some toxicity, bad experiences in the past. They may be a very new team. They might not even know quite where to begin, and they might be kind of struggling to find themselves. If you have teams that are in that zone, I would highly encourage you to start with these simple pieces of just building relational trust before asking them to go on and do deep, meaningful work, because chances are they won't be able to do deep, meaningful work because they will be splintered and they will be fractured in doing that work. Some people may do it, others on the team don't do much of anything, and they really haven't built that camaraderie of trust to be able to depend on one another to do the work. So I would highly encourage you to start here and make sure that teams are building this and building these muscles of trust before you move on to deeper work. Okay, so moving on to the next area of teams, that would be the structure. So if we think about our triangle again, about learning network with relational trust being a main anchor piece of the learning network, how we learn together, and trust being a major cohesion of that. Now think about the structures that we have to have in place. Teams don't do their work on accident. So what are those structural pieces that are there? Well, if you take a look again at the handout, you look at the resource on structure, take a moment, pause the recording, look at the handout, and look at and read the structure section. What are our strengths? If you think about some of those common pieces of structure, some of the easy things come to mind, like, do we have a peer facilitator leader? Does every member of the team have a role? Do we have an expectation of an agenda that is built for every meeting? Is that agenda visible for everyone and in a Google Drive or a Microsoft OneNote Drive where people can add items to the agenda that they would like to discuss? Do those agendas have times on them so that we don't just have a free form discussion, that we try and keep it organized and tight so that things on the agenda get accomplished and that we don't spend all our time talking about one thing? So you get the idea. Some of those things are very, very critical. And one thing to remember as a team leader or as a team member or as an administrator is this. Although you may not be bothered by team meetings that are not structured, organized, and accomplish something, I can bet there's at least a person or two on the team that they do feel that way, that they're very, very bothered, like a pet peeve, a very strong, averse reaction to not having structure and purpose in a team. So don't ever take for granted that just because you may be feeling one way that others feel the same way too. There might be people there that are very, very bothered that there isn't a structure that's followed every time. So for the good of everyone, run with a structure. Always maintain a team structure. Start with the strengths, what you're already doing, build from those, and then add other components that you could start working on one at a time and fold that into your team performance. You'll be surprised how much better some people feel because there's a structure to the team. So also take a moment here. You can pause the recording and have a quick chat. What would be some of the benefits of having structure for the team? How does this build efficiency for teams? And you can even think of an action that you can come up with now that you could do and work on and begin right now to improve the structure of your team. I would highly encourage you to do it. Please don't make it a New Year's resolution that you think of and never do. Teams are critical to performance in schools. Taking the time to invest a little bit in the learning network, the structure, and the process will pay huge dividends in student learning and in teacher cohesion to a team. The last section is the process, and these were done purposefully in order. Learning network is the first thing we should attend to. If we don't have relational trust, if we don't have communication and understand the way we learn together, nothing good will happen, typically. If we have haphazard structures and structures that aren't present or no structures at all, teams just don't run when it's unstructured. Think about a football team. When you watch them play, they're very structured, aren't they? The way the team performs every play is highly, highly regimented. It's highly, highly predictable, and then everyone can execute their role on the field. But it's because of that structure. The process for us then as teacher teams, this is what we're working on to help improve not just our team performance, but also student performance. So what do we do in our team is the process. But notice, the process won't work well if we don't have a learning network established with relational trust, and if we don't have structure in our teams. When we get together to run the process will be variable, it will be haphazard, and it won't yield great results. So the process is that last and third final piece that is so critical to what teams work on. The process that we suggest at the Core Collaborative to work on is the Leading Impact Team's structural device. In this process of how teams do their work, this is the way that teams can come together. They look at their own work and the work of students, and they can accomplish it in a team meeting by following an evidence, analysis, and action protocol. The real question for you then would be, the end result of doing the work in your team process really has to come down to this question, doesn't it? How much time is your system, your school organizational system or school district system, focused on expanding student ownership of learning? Think about that question. How do we know we're expanding student ownership of learning? That's a great question. And how much time? The typical answer that I hear out there as I work with teams across the country is that most often people will admit to say, maybe not as much time as we ought to. And maybe your thoughts were there too, where you look at it and say, I'm not sure that we are putting a lot of time and effort into expanding student ownership. Or you may be thinking, not even quite sure where we would want to start to do that. If any of those ring true for you, then today's webinar becomes a really important place to start, doesn't it? To think about, first, what do we have as a team? We won't get to this student ownership of learning if we don't have a team process that's focused on a learning network with relational trust, structures, and a process such as impact teams to generate and focus our work so that we know we're doing the most important work first. Take a look at this video observation of a couple of students in 5th grade, 2 boys that are out in the hallway because the rest of their classmates are in the classroom. They're also very loud and working as well, so these boys stepped out in the hallway. I want you to take a look at these boys as they're working on their 5th grade writing, and notice the strengths of these students. What are they doing? And what are they doing that impresses you? And think about some of our conversation earlier today, and see, what would you say if you gave them feedback on their work? But also be thinking now in light of what we've been talking about for the last half hour or so. What's going on in the teacher team at this 5th grade level? What do you suppose they do when they work together? And what do you suppose happens in each of their classrooms as a result of the work they do as a team? So take a look at these boys, and then we'll come back. We'll have a little feedback and reflection after the video.
So originally I thought I fell at dark green because I had 2 main ideas and I supported them with relevant details from the text. And as I was writing my evaluation of myself, I noticed that one of my details weren't strong enough. So when I reassessed myself, and I saw that I landed at sky blue because I saw that I had main idea clearly stated, and that I didn't say how they relate back to the main idea. So that's why I thought I fell at light blue, because I didn't have strong enough detail. So I didn't really think I fell on dark green. Okay, so did you read the student sample? I didn't read it, but I did read the second main idea because I wanted to compare to see if my second main idea was similar to that one. So then I would know if I would fall more to the dark green than to the light blue. So I noticed you say your first main idea is it has the right amount of detail and explains how they relate back, and your main idea is clearly stated. Okay, so it's definitely towards the end. I present a second main idea. However, the details do not explain how they relate back to the main idea. So you say you have relevant details, but you don't explain how they relate back. Yeah. Can you read for me your first detail and then just go on from that so I can see how you transition to it and see if you include that how part in between? Okay. For instance, there are designated parts of the park for small dogs to play and big dogs to play. In addition, people who are currently taking their dogs to the playgrounds will have a larger chance of their dogs getting hurt or lost. Clearly, one can see how safe dog parks are for dogs and their human companions. So I don't know if you meant to do this, but it sounds like over here, your last sentence is explaining your second detail. So I definitely don't think you're on this. And I don't think you're on dark green yet because you didn't explain how both details relate back to the overall main idea. So I would say you're on blue.
So if you think now about that video and reflect a little bit about the student strengths, what did we see in those students? And some of the common comments that you may have jotted down and others did in the chat function of this and in previous sessions as well. The students have, those two boys have an amazing back and forth dialogue, don't they? When we think about what we'd love to see in our students is that peer assessment work going back and forth between these students was clearly at a high level. Their skill and understanding of the rubric they were using was outstanding, wasn't it? As you look at what the teacher prepared for them with that rubric laminated that they were using of those different colors, the boys knew where each of those steps was, but they also knew what it was going to take to move from one level to the next. That was outstanding. Another strength that I'm sure you saw in that was the boys' ability to give and receive feedback was outstanding. They weren't hurt by that process. They saw that as valuable. If a partner could point something out you could improve, they saw that as valuable. Thinking now about the system, what's going on at that school, it probably wouldn't surprise you to think that that must be going on across all the fifth grade classrooms, that they can share and benefit in that common target of writing. And if you were thinking that thought, you would be correct. The fifth grade team has built something that they can share together to say, this is our common target of writing. The other thing that those fifth grade teachers spend ample time on is coaching the students to understand that rubric and the target so that they are very proficient and fluent in using it, so that when they're doing their work, they can use that tool to look at their own writing or their partner's writing and start to look for things that they may have not done as well as they could have, things they could improve on the next draft, and so on. So very powerful, isn't it? So when we think about what the team must be like, that's the work they're doing. And in fact, the work they're doing is the process of impact teams. But you can also guess those teams have a very structured existence and they have a very strong learning network with strong relational trust. So when you take a look at the other tool set that I left for you on handout pages 6, 7, and 8, and you look at putting all this together of structure, process, and learning network, and the 5 core concepts of what we at the Core Collaborative teach teams to look for. take a look at those two rubrics now in total to look at how we function as a team and what we do as a team. The 5 core concepts are the things that teams work on. Structure, process, and learning network are how teams function. Powerful, isn't it? As you look at that, again, I encourage you, start with a place of strength. What do you do well already? What are some things that you know you and your teacher teammates are doing well? Start there. Find those first and anchor yourself on the strength. Then think of what you could build. Maybe one thing that you as a collective group could start working on and focus on that. That way you have something to hold on to that's building from strength, looking at something that you think will give you great power moving forward. Take a look at this quote from Rick Stiggins about how important it is that students are active in their own learning. So the goal of our work with those 5 core concepts is to activate students that their ownership of their learning is built and they know where they are. So assessment for learning is involving the students in them being able to assess their own progress. That's our goal. So that is assessment capable learning, and that more than triples the speed of learning when we're doing that. So this is the product of teams that we're looking for, is that students are getting that benefit because we're building experiences for them where they are involved in every aspect of their own assessment, knowing where they are and what they can work on to get a little bit better, and then a little bit better, and then a little bit better. So the 3 key questions are pretty simple, isn't it? Students should be able to reflect and answer on these. Where are we going? What's the learning target? Where am I right now? And where do I go next? And if we think about the video of those 5th grade boys, they could answer all 3, couldn't they? They're working on that writing piece. They're getting better at writing that dog park essay. They know where they are right now, and they know where they're going next. They know what they can work on to improve. And that came both through self and peer, that they're able to reflect on that. So as you take a look at it again, focus on one thing that you could work on as a team. What could you do? What would you be excited to work on together? At the Core Collaborative, as we work with teams out there in the field, that's what we coach them to do as well, is that we look at one thing that we can work on to get better, and what would that be? And how is it tied to some of the strength areas that we have and things that excite us the most and things we'd most like to see in our students? And we focus on those high leverage strategies to get students activated to own their own learning. So let's think about next steps for you. Where are you? What could you do? Well, one of those things is to consider who at your school is most ready to do this work. Do you have a grade level or a subject area team or two that really have a high level of cohesion and functionality now, that they could be the model team, they could start and others can follow? And the other side of that would be, so what does the rest of the school focus on while the model teams get started doing the deeper work? So sometimes what we've talked about today, teams can begin working on building their relational trust. Teams could start working on their structures, and they could start focusing on what we do to make those better, and then eventually move to the process. So if you have some teams that are in need of some triage to get them started and to get positive and get them moving, teacher leaders and administrators could start there. Focus on the learning network and focus on structures. That would be a really solid goal to work on for the first half of the school year, or even for the whole year, to get things moving and get them very positive. So here's just a quick video of a principal that started this way. She too started with looking at her learning network and looking at her structures as teams. And now she has a 3-year plan layout for her staff where she's moving now into the processes and will start bringing along other teams to begin their work on learning networks and structures. And as you listen to her, listen for the strengths that she mentions and her excitement about her teams at her school, and also what you think she's doing to help support each team as they go along, and things that you might look at and say, that might be a good idea for me, or something you find exciting.
After we came back from our training at Riverside County Office of Ed, the first thing I noticed is the fire that was lit within the teachers. The idea of relational trust and building teacher efficacy and understanding that our goal is student improvement and growth, and giving them almost the permission that not every student is going to reach grade level, but we're going to do everything that we can to get our kids as close to grade level as possible, kind of allowed them to focus on the growth, not so much on reaching a certain benchmark by a certain date, and really focus on their instruction and how they can show growth rather than focus on that end benchmark. The excitement and the passion from the teachers was just evident from day one. They were super excited. They were driven, self-motivated. They came to me and asked me to have release days because they wanted to unpack the standards and really dive deep into the standards and have a true understanding of them. And this all came from our first session. Since then, our teams have grown so much, and I am so excited and so proud that our teacher leaders are now really leading our collaboration teams with a focus on student information and how we can show growth in our students, and what we need to do as a team to work together and to give all of our students the opportunity to have full access to their curriculum so that they can really grow individually.
So when you think about what Lori was talking about how her teams began and what they were doing and what they're excited about now, notice that she really did begin in that place of, let's focus on who we are as a team. What is our learning network and our structure? And how do we know that that's solid? But you then heard the true excitement about what it's like when teachers start to feel that productivity of being on a team that is successful and structured, that it leads right away into the student performance issues about the process, and how excited they were to look at standards, how they were excited to look at the assessments that they can use and the ways to activate students in their learning. And isn't that what we wish for in all of our teams? Isn't that what we hope for and plan for and work toward? Is that our teachers will feel that excitement from the ground up, that it isn't something that we do to them, but it's something that they want to do from the ground up. Powerful stuff, isn't it? Very exciting. So as you think about where to go from here, I've left for you a resource about a 6-step challenge that you can start working on. And I would suggest start there. Start with some of these basic pieces in a team and begin there. Think about the dialogue you use. Think about the communication you have. Think about how you do it. How will you get these kinds of things happening in your school or on your team? And start there. And remember, start small and basic. Do things that are reachable, and then move forward and add more things. So a couple things then, if you're looking to connect with me, you can certainly do that. My Twitter handle is on there, at Horton_David_DH. My email slightly covered up on that screen, but it was on the lead slide as well, as daveh@thecorecollaborative.com, and also my Facebook. We very much would like to hear from you about what you would like to know more about, or questions about how you bring these kinds of things to your school. So feel free to fire any questions away by email, those of you that are on the recording, or through Twitter or Facebook. We'd be happy to interact with you, and I'd be happy to interact with you at any time. So other things you can do to learn more from us at the Core Collaborative. So this is just one webinar in a series of webinars from outstanding presenters, partner consultants, authors, and others that are sharing snippets like this in about an hour-long format. We encourage you to listen to several, or to use them as PD opportunities at your school. You can also take a look at our website and find some national collaboratives that are going on that might be in your regional area. We'd love to see you there. You can also reach out to us to learn more about how you bring any of these training ideas to your school, or about the ideas of how other schools are doing it, so that you can borrow some of their ideas to make it an exciting thing at your school. Also, take a look at one of our hot off the press publications called Peer Power. It's an assessment revolution. It has 13 authors that have contributed to this book about how we empower students to take ownership of their learning. There are lots of ideas in this, including a chapter from me about how you can do work with teams. There are things in the book about metacognitive strategies. There are things about self-impaired assessment, things about science learning, English learning, and so forth. Take a look at it. You'll love the book, and you'll want that resource for every teacher on your team. Also, take a look at our Impact Team Pre-Assessment Survey. If you hit that QR code, you can go onto our website and find, where are we? How close are we to being on the move with impact teams, and what could we do to do it? And you can also join us in any of these outreach pieces I mentioned at the beginning of our presentation about finding us and connecting to us through our website, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and so on, and Twitter. So look forward to hearing back from you, and hope that you send any questions on to us. Thank you for joining me for this webinar on leading school teams, and we wish you all the best in your journey, and we hope the best for your students as well.